Welcome to Comics Connects, the podcast where we explore the ideas, technologies, and people shaping the future of work. I'm Nick Cross from Comics. We're Australia's leading digital workspaces and cybersecurity specialist. In each episode, we'll connect with industry experts and thought leaders to uncover how organizations are transforming the way that teams work, stay secure, and thrive in a digital-first world. Let's connect now. Hello and welcome to Comics Connects. I'm joined today by the IGEL team. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for coming.
Morning.
I'm Darren Fields, and I'm VP for UKI and International at IGEL.
And I'm James Millington. I am VP of Product and Solution Marketing.
I'm Justin Thorogood, Area Vice President for Channel for UKI and APAC.
Could you tell us a little bit around who IGEL actually is for those of the audience that don't know about IGEL?
So IGEL is a secure endpoint operating system. So essentially, we are an alternative to the traditional endpoint operating system that gets run in enterprises. So with that, we bring a secure by design approach that's really set for the future of zero trust and enabling that secure end-to-end strategy based on secure by design and not by layering lots of tools to try and prevent attacks.
IGEL secures giants like the NHS in the UK. Everybody globally has heard about obviously healthcare and the challenges on there, but what's your key DNA and what are some of the must-haves that organisations like healthcare should be having in their enterprise?
I think first of all, we are secure by design, and that's important for secure environments like patient records or secure government. You know, you have to be able to trust that the data and the way it's being managed is going to give you the security requirements you want, and that's what IGEL provides.
And from a user perspective, how are you different from the traditional way people work? Do the users see any difference, or do you actually provide a better outcome for them?
They don't see any difference in terms of the user interface. And as I said, it provides them a better outcome. It gives them security when, let's be honest, the traditional platforms today, the traditional OSs, should I say today, are hacked and targeted on a daily basis. You know, I was with a customer a few weeks ago. They had 7 breaches in the last year. So you have to assume breach and you have to take a view of, I need to be different and do something to protect my environment. And that's what we provide.
Yeah, I think you, Darren, mentioned healthcare there. I think for like doctors, clinicians, they want a system that just works. It gives them direct access to the application. So within healthcare, I think we have a very specific story, and we have specific stories that work very well in other verticals. But a great example would be a doctor seeing a patient in the hospital, goes up to a workstation, they use a pass, they tap it, and they go straight into the electronic patient record system. So they don't even know IGEL exists.
What you're really saying is where there's maximum flexibility that users are now expecting, whether they're working from home, whether they're traveling, or whether they are needing to move between different parts of an organization. But IT have got that security challenge around complexity now. So how does IGEL simplify the IT administration side of things at the back end?
Classically, you have the trade-off of security and usability. The thing that's really changed in enterprises today is most organizations have realized that running the applications and the data at the endpoint is the least secure way possible. There's been so many incidents in the news where laptops have been left on trains, have been stolen, and following that is a big breach report trying to understand what was on the device, what kind of records were stolen. Particularly in healthcare, you see rules and regulations that you have to have a public disclosure if more than, say, 500 patient records are breached. Well, if it's a laptop with patient information on, you have to do a full forensic analysis. With IGEL, there is no patient data, there is no data stored on the endpoint. There is no usability trade-off. The user interface is just like a traditional interface. You can start your applications, you can start your browser. With most organizations now moving to more of a SaaS-based application environment, or you have the traditional VDI environments, which are moving increasingly to desktop as a service environments, you've picked the applications and the workloads up away from the endpoint. And because you're not looking at the operating system to have to be completely multi-purpose to enable everything from TV streaming to enterprise coding and everything in between, and opening up the operating system to enable all of that to happen, we are now able to lock down that endpoint so that the operating system cannot be changed. It's an immutable operating system. No changes can happen. There's no data on the endpoint. Everything is encrypted. It's small and it's modular. Only what the user needs gets installed at the endpoint. And to your point about the manageability, that makes it much easier to manage. Yes, we do updates, but they're much smaller. We're a 1 gig operating system versus the 64 gig footprint of a traditional endpoint. So it's much easier to update. There's no trade-off whatsoever with the user experience, much more secure by design, and integrated with those critical partners that organizations are looking for, zero trust, and delivering as part of that device pillar of zero trust, and Essential 8, being able to make sure that we deliver on those requirements.
There is a real value to not only the cybersecurity team, but the IT service desk that need to manage vast swathes of devices and multiple devices per user, and simplify where it makes sense to have a different operating system, a different approach in their environment.
Yeah, so there's a couple of approaches to that. One is, if you have a different environment there, if there is a problem, you dramatically reduce the blast radius of any impact. To the admin point of view, we've had customers tell us that their admin to endpoint ratio is about 1 to 20,000, as opposed to about 1 to 5,000 that we see in the traditional environment.
I think one of the point I'd add to this is, with a recent customer that I've been speaking with, it could take several hours to do an update on one device. So you're a big organisation and you're trying to do these updates across a big, broad customer base, 100,000 plus, and you're taking 4 hours on a device. That's a massive impact on your business.
You're talking large scale, but this also sits at the smaller scale, doesn't it? There are organizations where there could be less than 100 people that could see real value around considering a different security approach to both their endpoint to enhance their app delivery strategy. Is there any perhaps stories where IGEL's invisibility is actually its strength? Is there something you might be able to share there?
Well, I think part of where we've come from as a business is working with highly secure organisations that we probably can't mention publicly. They probably wouldn't be happy for us to disclose that, but we're talking organisations with hundreds of thousands of individuals, that are introduced to IGEL technology on a daily basis, and maybe they don't even know. Again, that has been, I said, part of our DNA. But you would find IGEL technologies operating system in places probably that you wouldn't want to be.
The customers that we're working with, they don't want us to scream from the rooftops about IGEL because that's what makes them secure. Right?
Yeah.
We're in the background doing what they need us to do to keep them secure. And so it's almost Fight Club rules, right? We don't talk about it.
You're the CISO's best kept secret is what you're trying to say.
And I think the point that you just made about small organizations as well, there's two significant things with smaller organizations. If they have an outage, they are much more likely to have their business critically impacted, shall we say. And they also don't have the resources often and the expertise to start creating complex layers of defense. So for a smaller organization, having that secure by design, simple to manage, is a perfect fit. And of course, as you go up into the larger enterprises, that value still holds true. But you do have, somebody said to me, well, you don't get fired for buying the traditional endpoint infrastructure. And I think that rule is absolutely broken now. We've seen any CISO that's had their organization hacked.
Yeah.
So that old rule is very much changing.
Well, it's that traditional environment, isn't it? You speak about it a lot, Darren, in front of customers. This whole manage, monitor, mitigate, and unfortunately, I think those times are coming to an end. I mean, we're seeing stories on the front page of the UK tabloid news every week. There's another company, big brands, but those cyber hacking groups are they're working their way down the scale. I mean, we've seen recently here with the Qantas incident, the refusal to pay the ransom, and now, was it 5.3 million customer records on the dark web?
5.7 million is now on the dark web. What you're highlighting is apathy at the security or the IT decision makers level. We'll always do this way. We'll spend lots of money on lots of agents that we think we need because it's the way we've always done things, is the biggest challenge that's keeping them awake at night, and they don't know that yet.
It's funny, there's several things with the endpoint, and I wouldn't say it's apathy, but this is how we've always done it, and this is all we know. One of the areas that we just launched a new solution for is business continuity at the endpoint. And what we're finding in that, when you look at all of the analyst frameworks that talk specifically about business continuity, they major on the data center. And they will have their real-time recovery objectives on the data center. And when we talk to customers, we have great conversations about their active sites and the connections between the active sites and how quickly they can recover to the active site. But then when you ask, well, what about the endpoint? Well, we don't have the data on the endpoint. That's backed up, okay? I understand the data. But what are users actually going to use to connect?
To your corporate data.
Exactly, to that data that's backed up. And at that point, there's
Yeah.
And the general answer is either we've got a few laptops in the cupboard, or we'll send somebody down to the local hardware store to buy a few endpoints. It's, okay, so you cover maybe 5% of your users. But I asked the question to the analyst, why is the endpoint recovery not featured and factored into the frameworks? And it's just what we've always done.
They've taken a broader view of everybody's using or taking a particular approach, so we'll ignore that to some degree.
Yeah.
Even though it's the critical thing of, if we go down, I want my people back up and working as soon as possible. How do they do that if their device is compromised?
Look at a recent major manufacturer in the UK. I mean, they were massively hit to the point that they're losing 70 million a day.
70 million a day.
70 million a day, and the government is now having to effectively put massive amounts of money in place to support them. Now, if they had a backup scenario, business continuity proposition, where they could dual boot into another environment, their manufacturing wouldn't have gone down. They'd have been able to continue working for a period of time while they dealt with the issue at hand.
So that's where you've launched a business continuity and disaster recovery solution. It's really important to understand that IGEL doesn't need to be a fit for everybody in production. You could run a traditional way if that's your choice of doing it, but having the option to dual boot into a different system so your device can still work, you can still access it, whilst IT and security are working on the problem, you don't lose 70 million a day.
It's an insurance policy. You're putting an insurance policy in place that if the worst happens, I can revert to that. Now you put in a position, your business in a position of security, right? You can continue, you've got a fallback.
It's essentially high availability for your endpoints. Yep, you've got your HA for your data center. This is high availability for your endpoints. Organizations tell us, if you can just get my users to Office 365, to Teams, and you can get them communicating, that is half the battle. It's just get that first stage. And if you are an environment where you have already gone to SaaS applications, to a DaaS environment, then we can get you seamlessly to where you need to be. We understand some organizations need to run or want to run a traditional environment. That's fine, but make sure you understand the risks. You've done it for your data center, now do it for your endpoint.
So it's interesting, Darren mentioned there about an insurance policy. Again, what we're starting to see, and I think this is a global trend, is that the cybersecurity insurance industry is booming. Right, we're seeing financial institutions taking out policies for hundreds of millions of dollars to provide them the protection should they have that major outage, that they can cover not just replacing devices and replacing hardware, but it's also about repairing reputation. And I think we're in a position now, so we're beginning our early rollouts with customers, but the conversations now are going back to that cyber insurance provider to say, we now have this solution in place. This potentially could help mitigate that very expensive policy and provide a reduction to that customer as a result of showcasing that they have a plan for the endpoint where historically they wouldn't have done before. I mean, the latest numbers are telling us from the respected those cybersecurity providers that the cybercrime industry now is worth $10.5 trillion. Like, to put that into context, if you take a look at the top 10 kind of assets globally, gold would sit there at just ticking over at $21 trillion. Nvidia is sat at number 2 at $4.1 trillion. So if cybercrime were a company, it would be the second largest asset globally by market capitalization. And that's a scary thought. That's only increasing, unfortunately. So what are customers going to do about it?
And the thing I'd add is, we talk about AI a lot, but that's making the attack coming from cyber hackers ever increasing. I mean, it's giving them new ways of hacking and impacting customers. But it's at all levels. Right? We talk about the big customers, but even the small customers. Someone I was with last week, their business was hacked. It's cost them tens and tens of thousands of pounds as a small business to get that resolved. That's a major impact for a small business. So it's happening, as I said, in increasing scale, but at all levels of business.
Users are still, from a humanistic side of things, still likely to click on the link, download the file, share something, and that causes a problem. So how does the IGEL read-only operating system stop attacks before they start to help create that business win scenario?
Yeah, there's a few levels to the security story. So at the simplest, 99% of malware is written for Windows. That's what it targets. So the chances of a hack coming in, being written for Windows and attacking Windows is highly likely. So if that attack comes in, as most are going to target that, if somebody is using IGEL and clicks on a malicious download or on a malicious file that's in an email, it's not going to run. It's simply not going to run. We are a secure Linux operating system. So first, 99% of the attacks out there aren't going to run. Second, if somebody really is targeting, well, as you said, the operating system is immutable. It cannot change. It doesn't change. Every time you reboot it, it's there fresh as if you've got a brand new golden image that you've applied. But the attackers are coming from at multiple levels, and a lot of what we're seeing at the moment are things like stolen credential attacks. So there was news with a BBC journalist just a couple of weeks ago that was told, sell me your username and password, and we'll pay you for it, and you'll never have to work again. And that's increasingly what we're seeing, that either stolen or just handed over credentials. So looking at, and what I'm seeing more and more organizations slowly adopting is the zero trust approach. Never trust, always verify. So we integrate with things like Entra ID and other authentication mechanisms. And we're able to do things such as checking the conditional access, checking that the device that it's coming from is an IGEL device. It is a managed IGEL device by the enterprise. So even if you have somebody that hands over their credentials, we're still going to check that the device is actually an IGEL managed device. And if it's not, if it's just the username and password that they've got, that's not enough to get them in. So it's important to look at the Zero Trust framework. It's important to look at the Essential 8 frameworks and make sure that you're ticking those boxes and you're not just letting anybody in and username and password that they're saying, you know, yeah, I'm Nick Cross, can I come in? No, because you're not.
So how does your model make compliance with, say, APRA 320, and how does it help deliver cost savings at the same time?
So with the APRA framework, and we're seeing this with a lot of frameworks, you have to be able to prove that you have a recovery mechanism in place. If something does happen, and you know that is, nothing is foolproof, and it is, but you have to be able to show that you have a recovery mechanism to come back. Now, the way that we approach that is first, be more secure by design. So start there.
Sounds familiar for what you've been saying?
Exactly. But, like I say, if you do have to run a more traditional endpoint, then, again, look past the data center. Make sure you've got something at the endpoint that you can get 100% of your users back up and running. You know, I hear, well, like I say, you can break out a few old laptops from a cupboard for the essential workers. Isn't every worker that you have essential? Isn't that why you're paying for them? Isn't that why they're there for your business? All of your workers are essential for you to be able to deliver business as usual. And with the IGEL business continuity and disaster recovery solution, that is what you get. You get a recovery time objective in minutes for 100% of your users to be able to get them back and get them connected. For your APRA framework, that is critical recovery.
With the complexities of the traditional, with the multiple agents, being able to prove you can restore operations quickly across each of those agents adds further complexity to the IT and security team. That's a lot of people and a lot of tools and systems. How quickly could you demonstrate that with the IGEL solutions?
Yeah, it's literally minutes. I would say a blanket, well, it's the time to reboot, but rebooting a traditional environment can take quite a while. With an IGEL, let's say it's 2 minutes. If you can get all of your users back in 2 minutes and get them just connecting to Windows 365 or Office 365 and communicating, that's critical recovery time.
2-minute recovery time every time is the desired state using IGEL solutions.
Yeah, and what we're finding in conversations with customers, and this is one conversation that has happened with a healthcare organization. They looked at this and said, we need this recovery for our endpoints. And then they started to do the implementation and then said, actually, why don't we just do this by default? Why don't we just...
The light bulb moment came on.
You know, I wrote a blog that said when I was a kid, you know, you go on holiday to somewhere fantastic and you spend all this money and you save up all year and you go to this place and you think, oh, it's wonderful here. But why do you go on holiday there and why don't you just go and live there? So the analogy is, you know, you put this fallback mechanism that is the safe, the secure, the place where you want to be. Well, why don't we just start with that actually and just be safe and secure by design?
We do see a lot of customers, they start down the road and they'll go a little bit of the way and then they get hit by something. And then they say, okay, we should look at IGEL. One of the big healthcare trusts in the UK, when the WannaCry happened, they were already using IGEL in certain areas of their business. That stayed up. That was perfect. Everything else went down, and then they've now said we need IGEL across all devices. So we see that happening quite a lot in our customer base.
The business continuity and disaster recovery solution, how does it actually work?
Great question. So the business continuity and disaster recovery solution is essentially an IGEL operating system installed alongside the Windows operating system on a device. It's actually 2 ways it works. You can either do that, or you can utilize what we term IGEL USB boot, which is IGEL OS on a bootable USB drive. What we actually see is organizations saying, I want both. So in the event that the Windows endpoint gets compromised or has a problem, then you can reboot and you can just select IGEL OS from the hard drive, and it will bypass the Windows partition completely, clean boot to IGEL, so you're using that same in-place hardware to just reboot into the IGEL OS. And then fire up a browser, connect to Office 365 or any of your SaaS applications. Organizations have the USB boot as well, just in case the hard drive actually fails. And if that happens, then you can just utilize the USB boot. So with the dual boot technology, critical there is, like I said, we bypass Windows, but we also make sure that that is kept for any forensic analysis that might need to be done on that Windows partition. So everything is kept, but your users can get straight back to work.
I think the key point here is what I said earlier. You're back up and running in 2 minutes on that device.
What
Right.
an incredible
So
insurance policy.
Yeah, exactly. You think about today, you're stuck, you're looking at a screen, you can't do anything. You don't know how long that's going to take to
IT aren't answering the phone to you.
No one's answering, no one's helping, you're stuck. Right here, 2 minutes, you're back up and running and working and communicating and your business continues.
And not just a fraction of your users, all of your users.
I'll challenge that for a second.
Sure.
All of your users, you talked about IGEL managed devices, but you also talked about a USB boot. So contractors can come into an environment securely.
Yep.
Whether that's standalone or using business continuity, they can have a little USB key onto their keyring. So if something goes wrong, they can continue working supporting your business. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. So it is that we've utilized that USB solution for contractors for some time to be able, and for BYOD use cases, where you want to turn that endpoint into a secure endpoint to access your information. So rather than letting somebody just with a traditional endpoint come in, so I want to lock down the entire endpoint and only then, and so I can do that check of, you're coming in with a username and password, but is that a device I actually trust? Is a device that is under management by me? And if that's the case, then you can come in. So it's extending that use case, the BYOD use case, the contractor use case, and that same technology that's tried and tested in the field to be able to enable that quick recovery for all of your users.
It's really simple for the business executive to understand. How do you help organizations change their standard approach to doing IT and security?
I think standardisation is vital, right? There are things that are non-negotiable, let's say. So in an example would be the cyber agent footprint. It's a corporate standard, right? So when those individuals happen to be using IGEL, they want the ability to have the comfort levels that it can be managed by Intune. That there is the cyber security vendor of choice, whether it be someone like a CrowdStrike, a Palo Alto, a Fortinet. That those agents, Zscaler is a recent addition to our IGEL Ready program. Those agents are developed by those organisations for our platform, regularly updated, and the organisation can select when those updates are rolled out. But it's ensuring that there is, as you say, a corporate standard wrapper around that environment. So at some point, if they do go end-to-end IGEL, that wrapper still exists. So that corporate standard is adhered to. And we have, I think it's circa 135 partners that sit across cybersecurity, other platforms, peripherals. So we spoke a lot about healthcare, even things down to like the voice-activated headsets that talk to the MRI and CT scanners, as an example. You know, those can be impacted by an update as well. They just suddenly stop working, and that's not something that's good for a doctor if they've got a patient that's sat there waiting for a scan.
And the flip side could be if you've got a big call center having to deal with whatever an organization might be doing, they have to have peripherals. They could have people flexibly working from home as well as in their office in rows of desks. We've all got those images. It's just as relevant for those people as it is for healthcare.
100%. And I said a recent customer win that I've just seen is is a joint win with Genesis that sits on our platform, a recognised contact centre platform. But I said there's 135. Again, it's consistently growing, and some of that is actually driven by a customer that has a demand, and we can see that there is a wider market opportunity for IGEL to co-develop with that organisation.
From an IT perspective, we've talked a lot about that. There is such a critical requirement around operational technology. Does IGEL have a place around protection that? It's typically deemed as legacy, don't touch me, don't turn me off, but how does IGEL help with that?
So there's several ways that we help, and we have a lot of manufacturing organizations, and the big move in operational technology, which a lot of your IT audience may not be necessarily aware of, OT is often the manufacturing equipment, and it has traditionally been air-gap network. It's been completely its own thing. In organizations, it will be run by a completely separate team. But there's been what's been called a convergence of IT and OT, and it is the OT devices are coming onto the IT networks and exposing them to the internet for things like improved processing, for looking at analytics of the data, of the production data, being able to get more smart with that information. But that is bringing devices and operating systems that are designed to be used for a long period of time, decades sometimes, and were not built for security and to be updated. It's bringing those onto networks, and we've seen a number of high-profile attacks in the past where it has been targeted at these OT devices. So how IGEL can help there? There's a few ways. One of the things is that we actually see a lot of virtual desktops in manufacturing. So Omnissa and Citrix have a presence there with VDI, and we can absolutely be a secure endpoint for any of that VDI infrastructure. That's the first way that we help. The second way that we help is through what we call IGEL Managed Hypervisor. And how this helps is a lot of this manufacturing equipment, as I said, it's been designed to run for decades. We see Windows XP still heavily in use in manufacturing. And Windows XP and other legacy operating systems were not designed to be built on the modern hardware. So a TPM2 chip, you can't run Windows XP on a TPM2 chip. So how are you going to update that hardware, which will definitely need updating, but you don't want to change the software? So one of the things that you can do is using the IGEL Managed Hypervisor is to run that legacy Windows operating system on an IGEL device. So you get that fundamental security of the IGEL device. You have the central management. So if you have manufacturing plants, if you have logistics, warehousing, for example, where it's very much what would be termed an edge environment, then you can utilize IGEL at that endpoint. You bring all of the management, and you can still run the Windows operating system, the legacy Windows operating system, in those environments, giving you the centralized management.
It's really interesting. I think utility companies would be a classic use case of this, around having their SCADA environments protected. So whether you're running water dams or running power plants, this has a place in those type of environments. So you've touched across IGEL in different verticals. From an IT perspective, just as relevant from an OT environment across different verticals too. Just different conversations, different problems to solve. But IGEL helps solve those issues for customers.
Absolutely. Everybody's dealing now with this convergence of how to protect their environment. It's the number one concern out there is security of the environment. And we are doing things in a fundamentally different way while also having the integrations with the critical partners.
One of the airports that we're talking to, their concern is digital signage, because a lot of digital signage around the airport still run on very old operating systems, and they're considered a vulnerable area. So by working with us on a potential IGEL solution, working specifically around those digital signage, we help secure that environment.
You've touched on a great thing there. Any environment digital signage is a threat because they don't necessarily think about how they secure that device. But there could be somebody there with a scanner, they could then look to get onto your environment. Suddenly they're into the network somewhere. I'm aware, JT, you've got a customer or speaking to somebody in a casino. A lot of digital signage. What can you tell me about them?
So again, we can't name them.
I was careful not to name them.
Yeah, we don't want to name them. I think the first conversation I can remember having with them, I think this was about a year ago, wasn't it? We asked them the question, how many times do you get breached? How often have you been breached? Expecting a small figure, and there's between 6 and 8 incidents per year.
Every other month they're getting hit.
They're getting hit. This is an organisation that has tried hiring the best people. Where we're talking, ex-government operatives, that are really into the depths of cyber. They've tried outsourcing. This is an organisation with an unlimited IT budget, so they can get the latest and greatest technology. They said that they had effectively been patient zero twice. So patient zero being the first known incident of this type of attack. They said they have had people arrested in the casino with surveillance equipment underneath their clothes. Well, they'll go to a blackjack table, they'll play there for an hour, they'll take their winnings and they'll try and engage in a conversation with the teller behind, to try and be there long enough for the equipment to do its job. Or taking a phone call underneath one of the digital signs, because again, they're trying to hack into the network. Obviously there's clever people that are sat behind, but they'll have a stooge come in. But it blows my mind, I think, that the fact that the attackers are getting smarter, they're finding new ways in, and then we look at the speed of which AI is adapting and the ability to get those kind of nefarious services, it is really frightening.
The digital signage, what we've seen in organisations is actually a really good use of looking at new use cases and looking at the resources that you have. One of the key advantages of IGEL is because we're a much smaller, lighter weight operating system, and we're not running the heavy application workloads there, you can make your hardware last up to twice as long. So if you have a strong sustainability requirement within your organization, then by making the hardware last twice as long, you can have a real impact on that sustainability story. 83% of the carbon footprint of an endpoint device is in its creation, initial transportation, and disposal. Well, if you can extend that over twice as long, then that is a great story. But one of the things we've seen with digital signage, and organizations are absolutely realizing the benefits of being able to do something dynamic, whether that is in a doctor's surgery, of being able to put rolling health advice on a screen while people are waiting, or whether it is employee information in a warehouse, updating them on safety information. One of the things that we've seen with digital signage, everybody's gone through this Windows 10 exercise, and we know one of the big impacts of Windows 10 is that there's suddenly a lot of endpoint devices that can't run Windows 11. So organizations have spent a lot of money replacing this hardware and have got these devices that are perfectly good that can't run the new Windows operating system. So we've worked with a number of organizations to take those devices and repurpose them and actually initiate digital signage programs. Because now all you're buying is a single screen. The hardware you're getting, because it's hardware you already have, but you're adding real business value. We've even seen one organization that's talking about selling the time on the digital sign to sponsors and other organizations, actually using that now as a revenue income, selling that time where they've got to capture
the real estate side of it.
Essentially that. But utilizing the existing hardware, being able to repurpose it, being able to make digital signage much more cost effective, and of course more secure because it's a secure endpoint that's there.
all this sounds wonderful, IGEL. How are people actually going to quantify this? How do you measure this? How do you look at that total cost of change and use their numbers, the people who could talk to Team Comics about, we like what we saw about IGEL.
Yeah.
I need to speak to my really tough person over here. Tell me how you're going to help me with my numbers so that I can validate why we should be doing IGEL. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so sounds like a great value proposition. Is it going to consume my company's entire budget for me to be able to do this?
And are the numbers real?
Yeah, so it's a great point. We see organizations being able to save up to about 75% of their endpoint budget by putting in an IGEL solution. How do they do that? There's 3 key savings that we look at. And we are just about to publish research which looks at about 130 TCO analyses that we have done with customers, and we have a terrific third-party tool where we can go through this analysis and do something specific for every organization. But there's 3 key buckets. The first is hardware savings, the second is software savings, and the third is operational savings. So how they play out. The hardware savings is taking your hardware CapEx budget that you have, and essentially we can make your devices last up to 100% longer. So you're delaying that hardware refresh cycle. Now, of course, at some point you will have to buy new hardware, but when you do, because again, we're only running what the user needs at the endpoint, instead of having to buy the top-end i7, i9 devices for all your users, you can buy an i3 or an i5 device that's more cheaper to buy and more power efficient as well. So that power efficient story, we see that in healthcare with the workstations on wheels where they get unplugged and taken and pushed around. We can make them last 22% longer. So giving improved flexibility for the care providers, reducing power and extending the device life cycle. So that hardware bucket is the first one that we look at. And we see organizations make about 50% of the savings on the hardware savings. So it's significant. So the second pillar of the TCO savings is the software. So traditionally, you're going to be buying an expensive security stack. So all of the TLAs, your EDR, your XDR, your AV, your VPN, your DLP.
Stop. Too many acronyms. Okay, there's a lot.
That's the traditional cybersecurity market for you, though.
Gosh, okay. So there's a lot that sit on this that not everybody in the business understands. So software savings.
Yep. So
how does it help?
Everybody has to buy those on top, generally. That you don't have to do with IGEL. And we see about 25% of the savings come from not having to purchase all of that additional software. The final 25% comes from not having to have your IT teams operationalize all of that software. So significant time savings in not only doing the purchasing, but also in then doing the implementation, the update, the management of all of that. So those 3 key areas where we drive improved TCO: hardware, software savings, and operational savings.
So you mentioned you've got a tool for this. How can people access that?
We work with the customer to go through that tool. It's their data. That's the important thing. We're not making data up. We want their data in the tool that they agree is their metrics, so that the result that comes out is very much personalized to them.
So working with Comex, we can give access to customers within the tool.
Correct. Yeah. And what you find is there's light bulb moments in the customer, because you get back into day-to-day operations, things are just moving and moving. When they actually take things apart and start realizing, oh, I'm paying that there and I'm paying that there. Do I need that? Do I not need that? The whole concept of their infrastructure changes for them and then broadens into a different conversation.
Darren, James, Justin, thank you so much for your inputs. Thank you, of course, for traveling the other side of the world to come and be here in Australia talking with us and talking to Australian businesses, your existing customers. We really value the partnership, your solution, how that helps differentiate Comex.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for tuning in to Comics Connects. I'm Nick Cross, and I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation on how technology and innovation are driving smarter, safer workplaces. To learn more about how Comics can help your organisation build a secure and seamless digital workspace, visit teamcomics.com.au or connect with us on LinkedIn. Till next time, stay connected and stay secure.